Welcome to Monologues by Hassie, where I'm going to be dropping unsolicited brain dumps from the depths of my grey matter. I'll talk about life, money, society, and self-development, plus whatever else lies up there, whilst hopefully not getting cancelled in the process. I remember a few years ago, I saw a news article about some big Band-Aid or first aid company. They came out with a range of bandages which matched the skin tones of different people. Now, for context, I do happen to have brown skin, but I also remember looking at this article and saying that is the most obscure thing that I can think of, because out of all the problems and issues that a minority group might have, a bandage is so low down on the priority. But this attracted so much attention, and people were praising the company for being inclusive with the colors of their bandages. But for my whole life, I have used a bandage and I have not really paid attention to its color. But for the benefit of the doubt, I will not even the benefit of the doubt, that's not right of me to say, but I will put it out there that I can completely understand that somebody might want to be represented, and maybe a bandage brings them that type of representation and inclusion. So I'm not going to rule that out. But what I want to talk about today is this kind of observation that I made when I was looking at that news article about the bandages, and what I see a lot happening in today's society when we're trying to learn things. And for the topic of this podcast, I want to talk about, are you limiting who you can learn from? So again, one of these big societal things I found is we've found more and more ways to divide ourselves. And especially if you're living in this kind of pluralistic society, especially in the West, where, there's been lots of immigration over the last 100 years from different parts of the world, and we have a very multicultural society. In the West, we do have pluralistic society. Now, if you're listening to this podcast from India and Philippines, then there are going to be demographic issues that I will touch on, which are going to make sense. But I just want to begin from the context of the West. And the most immediate obvious things that we have are things like skin color, ethnicity, race. I think even if you are in India and the Philippines, you will still have all of those kind of demographic breakdowns. And on top of that, we have gender, sexuality, so many other things that kind of go into the way that we break each other down. And I find that one of the things that, and I'm guilty of this as well, is when we're trying to learn something, we prefer to learn it from somebody who looks like us. And of course, that's great. And chances are it makes it easier and more relatable. But if we always come across with a mentality where we need to learn from somebody who sits in the same demographic subgroup as we do, that becomes very problematic. And think of it this way. If you're from, it doesn't matter whether you're from a minority or majority group, but let's focus on a minority group. And if you perceive yourself to be a minority group because you've overlapped a few different demographic backgrounds, maybe you've overlapped gender and sexuality and ethnicity and skin color, and you're in this niche and you'd like to learn something from somebody who is also in that niche. The problem is, let's assume that your community, your minority, does not have those particular skills yet. By waiting for somebody to come along from that group who has learnt those skills, it causes a problem. So I know that in the past, I would have naturally gravitated to somebody who was like me. And, I have multiple identities depending on where I am in the world, and I don't mean bipolar. When I'm in Sri Lanka, I identify a particular way, but for most of my time, I live in Australia. And I think in most countries in Australia and outside of Australia, I identify as an Australian. Within Australia, I will also kind of mix my Sri Lankan heritage. But if I waited for people from my community to teach me things, I would be absolutely screwed. And the reason is those skills don't always exist yet. But I see this as such a prevalent aspect, and there's a reason that this happens. A, it's more comfortable, and B, sometimes when we've categorized ourselves in some sort of minority cohort, which there are so many ways to cut the demographic pie. So there might be divisions of demographics that I haven't even discussed that you might identify yourself as being in. And within these divisions, you might feel that, well, that group over there has an advantage. So if I went and learnt from them, well, they probably can't teach me what I need to know. And this is going to be a very crude example, but let's take the examples of guys who want to learn how to approach and pick up women. You'll have short guys, and the first thing they'll say is, well, that guy's really good at talking to girls, but, he's he's 6 foot tall and he's got, his jawline is stronger than my immune system. And whilst that could all be valid factors for contributing to why they're good, chances are there's going to be other people who have that exact same demographic type as the person you said you don't want to learn from, who aren't successful in that skill. So whilst there may be advantages they get from being in that demographic, they have still developed a skill, and chances are there's still something that you can go and learn from them. Now, bringing this back to other skills, I see, when we're looking at things like programming, there's so many different demographic subgroups that people are trying to kind of niche down into. But ultimately, you want to be open where you can go and learn from somebody, anybody. So one of the most valuable things that I've done in like the past few years is I've removed these barriers that say that I can only learn from somebody who is in my demographic. And this is a beautiful thing because I can now go learn from a white Christian woman or an Asian man or a Muslim woman or a Muslim man. It doesn't matter. I can cut this. I can learn from a gay person. I can learn from a straight person. It really doesn't matter. If there's a particular skill, then I can absorb this knowledge from this person. And that is a beautiful thing because it's an interaction between two people who are different. But I think you both add value to each other because the types of questions which are going to be asked when you're the student and you're learning from somebody who's kind of outside of your kind of mainstream demographic group, you're going to have questions which are slightly different that person might not expect. And it's probably going to make the both of you better. So I really value, I'm trying to remove as much as this possible, the capacity, this kind of limiting belief that I need somebody who is a male, is 5'5", is Sri Lankan, grew up in Australia. I don't need this. I can learn from absolutely anyone. I can learn from a woman, a man, a child. I can even learn from a bloody dog if I had to. And that's the mindset I have. And I've seen more extreme versions of this. Now, I've only spoken about these kind of, I think, more commonly known demographic groupings where, race, ethnicity, religion, sexuality, height could be one of them. And these are kind of very obvious. But I find something that I've noticed in mainly young men, but it might be in other I'm sure it exists across the board, but I've particularly noticed this in young men, is that in addition to all these kind of demographic groups, they form their own divisions where here's my life events up until now. I've done all these things and I've screwed up my life. Can you find an example of somebody else who's also screwed up my life or screwed up their lives, who is a few years ahead of me and has hit success? And I only want to learn from that person. Now, what they've done is they've picked such a small demographic grouping, and that person probably doesn't even exist, and even if they do, you can't find them. And they've basically limited their belief. Their mindset is so limited that they're only going to learn from somebody who's a few years ahead of them, who's reached success, but much like them has also fucked up their past. Where the ideal scenario should be, this person should say, well, there's not going to be any one person who can teach me how to do everything. So the first mistake is assuming that this one person who's a few years ahead of you that has also fucked up their life can help you accelerate to a particular point, and they can teach you everything. Because even if they could, why would they want to? This person has their own life. So when I learn so many different skills from different people, and there's different people I look to who are experts and who are good at different things. And that's who I approach to learn different skills. I don't rely on any one person, and nor would anyone rely on me, for example, for all their knowledge and all their needs, because that would be a tragedy, because there's so many things I'm horrible at and that I should not be a role model for certain subjects. But I can be a role model, for other subjects and help people out with those. So it's very natural that we should really seek as many people and as many sources to learn from. And we shouldn't be limiting ourselves based on some idea of a demographic or group that we're part of in our mind. It's ineffective. And here's the thing. Let's go back to that whole minority example at the start of this episode. If you're in a minority and your minority does not have a skill, and let's say everyone in your minority has that limiting belief that only our community or only our minority can help each other develop this skill. If you're the one person who now goes outside your kind of main demographic tribe and you go speak to other people and learn skills, regardless of how advantaged or disadvantaged you think they are, right? If you put that aside aside for a second and try to learn what you can. And you might have to develop and tailor that knowledge. Well, you're going to be the first person in your group to get that knowledge. And then, assuming everybody else still has that limited mindset where they can only learn from somebody who looks like them, who has the same sexuality, who is the same gender, right? And so on and so forth. You're now the person that these people will look to. So you've created an advantage for yourself by removing the limitation of who you can learn from. So I'm going to end this episode here. I want you to have a think. Have you been limiting the ways you can learn? Have you been applying, concepts of demographic groupings? And I don't care what demographic groupings. That's really up to you. But have you been limiting who you can learn from based on the demographic groups that you identify with? And if you have, do you think that's a healthy belief to hold? And do you think that it serves your highest purpose? And I will end it there. And to all of you listening to this, I wish you great success with all your endeavors. You've just made it through another episode of Monologues by Hassie. It brings me great pleasure to know that you made it to the end. To listen to more episodes, subscribe on your favorite podcast app or visit monologuesbyhassie.com. Thanks for swinging by.